Hey guys, I am 2 weeks postpartum today. Bob is 2 weeks old today. So I thought today would be a good day to finally give you guys updates and stuff like that. So I'm going to give you guys a rundown of my birth story. It's probably going to be pretty long, and I took notes as well because it was 2 weeks ago, and thankfully birth and labour is the most easily forgotten anything. Pain, but anything. So, so basically on the 3rd, I went for my antenatal appointment and there was protein in my urine again. At that stage, I was 38 weeks and 6 days. The midwife sent me up to birth suite for a potential induction because of how far in I was, that I'd sort of had some high blood pressures. I didn't that day, but I'd had them, and because I have a history of preeclampsia, so she thought they would probably induce me. They sent off the urine for further testing, and they checked my bloods. They put me on a CTG and everything, and then Terry and I were pretty much begging to go home because it wasn't looking like we were going to get induced. Basically, Terry and I were a bit fed up of being there. We'd been there a few hours. We hadn't planned on having to go up to birth suite or anything, so we hadn't organised for the babysitter or anything like that. So we'd asked to go home and wait out the results and then come back if need be. So they agreed to that because we only lived just down the road. And basically it was a case of if my urines came back with high protein again, we'd have the option of induction on the Thursday, and this was, as I said, the Tuesday. If the bloods came back as preeclamptic, I would have no choice. I would be induced on the Wednesday, so the day before, as in the day after I was there, the day before my potential elective induction. So I got the call that night that the urine was high, but they weren't too concerned. The urine was high, but they weren't too concerned about the bloods. So that meant we could choose to have the induction on the Thursday or not. So I did tell you guys about my grandmother was dying in the hospital, and they basically told us we only had a few days. So if I chose the induction on the Thursday, I'd be 39 weeks in 1 day. Also, I was already looking the same way as I did with Eden, with the progression of potential preeclampsia, if that's the right wording. So Terry and I decided that we would take the induction. So that was the Thursday morning. I did end up getting a stretch and sweep while I was on birth suite on the Tuesday, and they said I was 2 to 3 centimetres already. So the idea of me getting the stretch and sweep was to try and get things going naturally before either the necessary induction or the if I was to choose one. So we did that, and they said I was already 2 to 3 centimetres dilated, which was pretty awesome. And then on the Wednesday, I was losing plug and show, and we did a walk around the park, and we also went and did the grocery shopping. And then once I got the kids in bed, I jumped on the treadmill and did a 3-kilometre walk on the treadmill. And I bounced on the gym ball while watching telly as well, because that always worked with the others. And I was getting some cramping, and it was sort of painful, especially while I was progressing with the treadmill, but it wasn't progressing into actual contractions. But I did go to bed with some pain, and I sort of hoped that through the night it would kick in, but it didn't happen. So Thursday morning, we dropped the kids off at the babysitter's, and we headed up to the hospital. I was on a midwife team this time, so they all sort of connected, and I could text them when I needed to, and I saw the same person almost every visit and stuff like that. It was really good. So the whole team was aware by that point what my plans were for birth, so that I wanted minimal intervention, even though it was going to be an induction. I like to be as active as possible in the labour, so walking around and stuff like that. I wanted a water birth, and I wanted no drugs, so they knew all that. And basically the plan was for me to get in there, they'd break my waters, they'd leave me for a few hours and see how I progressed, and if things weren't happening fast enough, they were going to give me the Syntocin drip. If they'd given me the Syntocin drip, they weren't going to, or they're not supposed to let me have the water birth. Not only that, I didn't really want to have the Syntocin drip anyway, so basically what we were trying to do was avoid that anyhow. So they did break my waters. At that point they said I was sitting at 4 centimetres, which was really cool. And they sent me around to do some walking around the hospital. We went up and downstairs, went for a walk. We were hoping to get in and see my grandmother, but we didn't really get time before contractions were starting, so I didn't get to do that. So they did the water breaking at 8, and the midwife was saying there was going to be a huge gush of my waters based on how she could feel, the fluids that she could feel and stuff like that. So anyway, that's what she was saying, and we didn't get that. We didn't even get a trickle, so obviously the baby's head was like right in the way of any fluids coming out anyway. But we did that, so we went for the walk. Met Terry's mum downstairs. My mum wasn't there yet. We were doing laps and stuff, and I was getting a bit sore again, but they weren't good contractions. So I went back to the room. The midwives asked me to meet them there at 9:30, so I did that. So by this point, my waters have been broken for an hour and a half. So they wanted me in at 9:30. They wanted to put me on the drip. Basically, I asked for a little bit more time. So I'd asked for a little bit more time to let contractions kick in on their own. And so they pretty much said, I think, that they were going to give me half an hour. Yeah. So they said I could have half an hour more to see how we go. So I started bouncing on the gym ball and I was reading. And then within that half an hour, contractions started to get okay. They chucked me back up on the bed to do OBS, put me on the CTG and check Bub's heart and everything. And out of nowhere, I got this massive contraction. I ended up crying and screaming in pain because it just totally took me by surprise. Like the contractions I'd had before that were sort of like ouchy, but this one just, boom, it went from like 0 to 100 out of nowhere. So from that contraction, they ended up leaving me and letting me go, so they didn't give me the Syntocin at that stage. They did ask me if I was going to be okay with having the Syntocin to get my placenta out if needed, and I said that was fine. If I needed the Syntocin drip, I would have taken it anyway. I was just trying to avoid it. After that big contraction, I really started losing track of time because things got really painful hard and fast from there. I was on the bed for a lot of that time, and in between contractions we were joking and stuff like that. I did, in the birth video I posted, you can sort of hear where I've gone, they were all bad jokes. So basically what that was about was there was a first time mum in the ward right behind me, and my bed probably would have backed onto her bed, but regardless she would have been able to hear me. And she was really quiet. She'd had the Syntocin drip and she wasn't making any sounds, but they'd said things weren't really progressing very well for her, whereas for me they'd sort of like bang out of nowhere. Before those shocking contractions came on, I was making a joke that me and my mum started making jokes about like purposely screaming out things like being ripped from a-hole to breakfast and stuff like that, and scaring her, which I obviously wouldn't do on purpose. We were just playing. But and then I started getting the real bad contractions and I was screaming. I am a screamer, and I swear, like, you wouldn't be able to believe the screaming and swearing that goes on when I'm in labour. Even though I tried so hard not to do that this time, especially knowing the first time Mum was in there, but it didn't happen. So yeah, so that's where in the birthing video I'm going, they were all bad jokes. That was pretty much that, because it felt like it was sort of like a karma biting me in the bum because of what I'd said. So basically, as soon as I got like my first little urge to push, like my body trying to do it on its own, I told them to start running the water. I was like, okay, now it's time to get in the bath. And they jumped straight on that and started doing that for me. But it takes a few minutes for the bath to run, so I was still on the bed and I was starting to get really uncomfortable, and I asked to get in and they said not yet, there wasn't enough water in there for me to get in yet. So as soon as there was enough water, I was in the middle of a contraction, so we sorted that contraction out and then I jumped in. And so this was my first water birth, and basically, like, when I was getting in the showers, both this time and the other times, I'd have it like really nice and warm, like how I'd want to have it at home. So when I get into the bath, they've got it tempered, they've got a thermometer, and it has to be a certain temperature for when baby comes out and stuff like that. So it wasn't as warm as I would have liked. I feel like the pain would have been relieved more had the water been hotter, but it's not an option, so there's that. While I was in there, they were monitoring Bub's heart through the water, which was cool because I'd not seen that done before. So they basically like put the CTG thing in the water onto my tummy to listen to Bub's heart, and then they could hear it from out in the, so we were in the bathroom obviously in the tub, and they could hear it out in my room. I thought that was pretty cool. and checking my pulse, and that was in between contractions. My body started to bear down on its own, and I sort of felt like it hadn't been long enough in labour, or good labour. In my previous labours, they'd always told me not to push because my body would start bearing down 8 centimetres every time I'd start pushing. And so they were constantly saying, don't push, don't push. This time around, I was thinking, okay, it hasn't been long enough, so when I would get that urge to bear down, I'd try and hold off. And so I don't know how many centimetres I was dilated at that point. They didn't check me at all from 4 centimetres. So I have no idea how far I was at what times, none of that. I have no idea of any of that. After the initial sort of trying to bear down and stuff like that, and trying to hold off on it, I was in a lot of pain, and at that point I was like, I can't do this, I'm giving up. I think every mother says that in labour. That's where I was at, and it was really, really bad. I have a little clip, I don't know if I'll put it in, but my mum happened to record the birth. Not the entire thing, just what she could. And part of it was where I was saying I'd made a joke that Tuesday night she'd had to come by 11:57 p.m. and if she was going to come on the Tuesday night, which she didn't, obviously. So given the timing in the morning, I said, oh, maybe she'll be here at 11:57 this morning instead. And anyway, fast forward a little bit, it got to, the midwife says, hey Stace, look at the clock, and it was 11:55, and I thought, there is no way I'm getting this baby out in 2 minutes, because it was still at that point where I was trying to hold off on the pushing because it felt like it was too soon. As I said, my waters had only been broken at about 8 o'clock, or just after, I think it was. So I was like, there's no way I'm getting her out in another 2 minutes. But the next contraction, my body really started to bear down, and I just went with my instincts and I started pushing. It took one push and her head was out. Then they told me to take a deep breath. All I could get out was nope, and pushing again, and her body was sort of most of the way out. She was sort of just dangling there, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, I wish this midwife would just grab her and pull her out. I am done, I've had enough. They wouldn't, so I just took a breath and pushed out, and she was out. So I took 3 pushes, but 2.5 pushes, and she was out right on 11:57 a.m. So I did manage to get her born on 11:57. She came out really blue and looking sort of bruised and like kind of red around the eyes. They said that's basically from baby coming out so quickly. And she didn't really take a breath at first, so we were sort of playing around with her on my chest, like trying to get her to take a breath, but also because I was so just out of it by this point, and I'd never had a water birth before, trying to get me to concentrate on keeping her head out of the water, keeping her body in to keep her warm, and trying to get her to take a breath all at once. But obviously we got her to take the breath. We got her to take the breath pretty quickly, so that was good. And she actually worked her own way over to my boob on her own really quickly, like within minutes, which none of my other kids hadn't done that. So I was really surprised by that, and she was a really good sucker, so it was really cool. I had asked to have delayed cord clamping as well, so we hung out in the bathtub for a while. And then the midwife had to get me out of the tub, and so I was still connected. She was still on my boob, and I was still connected to her as well. My placenta was still inside, and my cord was out and still attached to her. So I had to get a hand to get out of the tub, and they put me up on the bed. Something they said to me, which I'd never known before, was they said basically if my placenta was going to come out on its own, the way it would work was that I'd get another contraction, and that's when the placenta would come out. With Eden, I didn't have that. My memory of her, and I was really out of it after her, was just that they started pulling on my cord, which was really thin with her prior to, I didn't really know about delayed cord clamping then. So I don't really know at what stage or how long I'd been, it had been before they clamped, but I do know my cord was already really thin. So like even prior to any clamping, it was thin. So basically they were pulling on that to try and get my placenta out, and the cord snapped. So then they tried to manually pull it out. The midwife tried with her hand up there, no luck. So then got a doctor in, no luck. And it was so painful. I even had the gas for that. I felt like that was worse than her labour. and nothing was working. So basically they said they were going to give me an epidural and send me to theatre, and I was flat out like, no, I went all that time without an epidural. I'm not having one now. So I had a general anaesthetic, and which it could, because I already had the drip in my arm because I'd been induced with her, and I'm terrified of needles. Not so much now, but I especially was then. So I asked for the general. They put it in the same drip, knocked me out, and I was sent to theatre to get my placenta out. So that's how it was with her. With Noah, once again, no contraction. They just pulled on my cord, but my placenta came out. So that was crazy. So they told me about this extra contraction. I was sort of like, what? It was taking ages. I don't know how long we were there for, but it felt like it, like, I don't know, 20 minutes or something. It felt like it took quite a while. I don't know what the norm is for that. And then sure enough, I got this other contraction. They pulled on my cord and it just fell out. And I was like, whoa. So that was a crazy cool experience. That was a new one for me. After that, Bob was still latched and nursing. So she is fluffing, something shocking. She was still nursing. She nursed for ages. I reckon it was probably like an hour and a half before Terry got to have a cuddle. And I had visitors and everything in that time as well. And she just wanted to nurse. And so basically the ped had to come in to check her over because she was snorting. And Noah did the same thing. So I wanted the ped to check her over because he had a skinny nasal tube, and it turns out she does too. And Eden probably does or did as well in hindsight because she did the snorting and stuff too. So we did have to unlatch her for the ped to come up, and they did her measurements and everything like that. So I gave Terry a cuddle then, but then she wanted to go back on the boob. So she spent a lot of time initially on the boob. Looks so uncomfortable, babe. Brian managed to get cuddles and stuff, but we were on birth suite for a few hours. I really lost track of time. I didn't announce for ages. I had people messaging me and everything to see how things were going, because they obviously, everyone knew that I was going in to be induced, and seeing messages from everyone, and I wasn't replying because I was just so, not so much out of it, but everything just happened really quickly. It just felt so chaotic that I just sort of got lost in the moment, and that was for a few hours. But yeah, and then so I ended up with no stitches. Everyone says that you can't feel your tearing. Well, this is what I was told. You can't feel your tearing through all the pain of childbirth. Rubbish. I could tell you exactly where I was tearing with Eden as I was tearing. And I did. And I told the midwives. And I did end up with stitches with her. Yeah, so I could tell you exactly where I was tearing while I was in labour with Eden, and I ended up with stitches with her. So it was the same thing with Noah. I could feel the same exact tearing, except it wasn't tears, it was grazing with him in the exact same spots. And then it was the same with Havilah again. So all three of them I tore in the same places, but I only grazed this time and the last time, which was cool. So I didn't have to have any stitches. I pooped again. It was horrible. It was a little bit, not too bad because I'd spent that whole week, and especially once I knew when I was being induced, really making an effort to get things going on the toilet so that we didn't have too much mess. But regardless, I ended up pooping again. And so the grazes are at the front and the back. I don't know how else to explain them, but it sort of feels like, do you, you know, the, like the join, I can't even think of correct name, so just bear with me, but basically like the seam in a boy's band's testicle bag, it sort of feels like that seam where the graze is or was. I haven't felt it much, but I had to like obviously keep the areas clean and stuff, so that's what I could feel. That's what I imagine the closest thing is to describing that. That's what it felt like from there as well. So I basically had a shower to clean up after my visitors were sort of dwindling in that. My auntie and my cousin came over to visit, and at that point they were ready for me to go to maternity. So they'd told me, because I'd had sort of a normal birth, that I could have gone home either that afternoon or whatever, but I decided to stay in overnight, one, to try and get some bonding time with her and not have to think about the kids while we're establishing breastfeeding again and all that sort of thing. And also because of her nose, I wanted to be in a good spot if anything had happened with her breathing or anything like that. And then they actually said that they had a hard time getting my blood pressure back down. No one really said much. They were just keeping an eye on it, and then no one said anything, and I went home. So I'm not sure what happened with that. I think they said I lost about 300 to 400 mils of blood this time. With Noah, it was around 320. With Eden, it was 1.6 litres. So I guess blood loss wasn't so bad. I lost my first clot, like ever, like decent clot. It was the weirdest feeling. It was like passing a mini placenta. I guess people who lose clots often would understand the feeling, but I don't know how else to explain it. It was just sort of like a soft ball of jelly just fell out after I peed. But the midwives weren't concerned because of the size of it, and I'd not long had the baby, and the placenta had come out intact and everything, so they were fine with that. So I feel like I probably lost like a fair bit of blood this time. Like I only bought 4 packs of maternity pads, I think, and I've probably gone through like 5 or 6, including most of the hospital pack that was there, but that was in labour as well. And I've been using like bigger sort of pads, not maternity pads, and not like I'd normally just use panty liners on a period. But they're just like bigger winged ones, but not maternity pads. So I'm onto those now. So I'd say maybe up to like 7, maybe 8 packs of pads. I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking and counting, but I'm guessing around there altogether. And it's really light now. Like yesterday I had a spot all day. There was nothing. And I've had a little bit more today, so it comes and goes in waves sort of thing. But yeah, it's pretty well good now. I stayed in overnight and then came home. We did bring the kids up to meet her at hospital, which I put a bit of a video of. I wanted to video their initial reaction, but Terry forgot to call me before he came into the room so that I would know to set up my video. We had visitors already at that stage, and it was just very chaotic time. I was getting obs and stuff because I'd just passed that clot, so it was really too chaotic to try and get their initial reactions, which was really disappointing because they were so very cute with her. They just had the biggest smiles on their faces. The photos that we got of them, you can see they're so smiley, but they're just blurry as heck because everything was just moving so fast. So that was a bit disappointing, but it was really cute. They're so gorgeous, and they're so stoked to meet her. All up, I ended up with 4 or 5 midwives in the room at the time. I honestly can't remember if the... Oh, bless you. I honestly can't remember if the 5th one stayed in for the delivery, but I had 5 midwives coming and going from the midwife team and stuff like that, and ended up with... It was definitely 4 and possibly 5 in the room while I delivered, plus there was Terry's mum, Terry, and my mum in the room as well. I also have a few, like, I think they're crazy cool coincidences between Havilah's birth and Eden's birth. So I thought I'd share those with you guys too. The first one was with Eden. I was induced because of preeclampsia. Now, I got my induction with her was on 39 weeks and 6 days. 39 weeks, 6 days with Eden. So went in there because I'd been leaking. They wanted to see if it was my waters, and it was, but they weren't too concerned about that. The reason they ended up inducing me that day was because I had preeclampsia. So I had been in multiple times over the previous 4 weeks getting checked because my migraines, my headaches were so bad that I felt like I could feel sound in my head just throbbing each time. It was shocking. I had the high blood pressure, I had the protein in my urine and everything like that. So I thought it was pretty crazy that we seemed to catch it early this time, but that I had signs of preeclampsia this time, and I was induced for the preeclampsia with Eden. So basically induction for early signs of preeclampsia with both of them. So that was one coincidence that I thought was cool. Both this time and with Eden, I birthed in the same suite, which was the one right in front of the midwife station. When they put me in there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the same suite that I birthed in with Eden, which was pretty awesome. Both the girls were born on a Thursday, and all 3 of the kids are born on an odd number at the start of the month, and all of them have been born in the morning. So Eden was 12:37 a.m. on the 1st of the 4th, 2014. Noah was born at 10:07 a.m. on the, excuse my brain, on the 9th of the 1st, 2017, and Havilah was born at 11:57 a.m. on the 5th of the 7th, 2018. So I thought that was pretty cool. I had a trainee midwife in for the birth with both the girls as well. So with Eden, I had a trainee midwife ask if she could sit in with my appointments and stuff like that, and get her experience up that way, and I said that was fine, so I had her then. And then on the day that I was having Havilah, they asked me if I wouldn't mind having a trainee come in for the birth so that she could get like signed off and stuff like that, and I said that was fine. So I ended up having a trainee for both of them. I actually had multiple trainees, if you want to think about it. So I had the 3 women from the midwives and me team, three midwives from the midwives and me team. Then I had that trainee that I was just saying about, and then I had another one who wasn't really a trainee. She was a qualified midwife, and she was qualified for water births and stuff like that, but her qualifications were down south, so in Queensland they don't count or something like that, so she had to basically sit on some more to get qualified for Queensland. And then my main midwife was actually not fully qualified for water birth deliveries, but my backup midwife was. So we ended up having the backup midwife who was about to deliver the baby ended up stepping back. My main midwife that I was supposed to have, she was supposed to be off for the day, but she was up there for some reason, so she ended up coming in and she got to deliver the baby, and that got her signed off. So I guess you could say 3 trainees even, but that was pretty cool. And both the girls have been born with talities. So Eden's feet were, when she was born, pressed right up against her shin bone. Like, it was odd. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, I think. It just completely like flat up against her shins. Whereas Havilah's are sort of not straight. Her feet just aren't straight. I don't really know how to explain that. But anyway, so they're both born with talipes. There was a couple other things, but I can't really think of them right now. But I just thought that was super cool that there was what I feel like were some cool coincidences. But basically that's it. I got heaps more to tell you guys about different things, and now that she's here and stuff like that. But I'm going to do different videos, because otherwise this one is just going to be super, super long. It's already a long one. But yes, that's the plan. But I'll talk to you guys soon, and I hope you enjoyed my birth story and finding out about everything, how things went. And yeah, and we'll talk soon. Bye.